Hey Ottawa, this is your Monday Market Snapshot for the Ottawa Real Estate Market. Please make sure to stick around until the end of this report because I'm going to include all of the monthly stats from the Ottawa Real Estate Board that I typically release in a separate release. And I didn't do that earlier this week because I was on vacation. My name is Annalee Rice and I'm a realtor here in Ottawa, Ontario. And every week I provide you stats to keep you updated on what's happening in Ottawa. Okay, first we'll look citywide. So first, looking at the active listings, we see that our number of active listings rebounded quite significantly this week, back above the 1,800 mark quite significantly, and our sales continue to drop this week. So if we want to look at why those things happened, first we have to realize that last week we had not only the end of the month, but we also had the beginning of summer, end of school, long weekend, all those things play into the number of active listings we had last week. That was at a low. And then this week with it rebounding following the long weekend. But the sales tend to lag behind that. So we had fewer conditional sales last week, fewer conditional sales this week with the long weekend running into it. And so what we'll have to do is see whether or not the sales will rebound the same as the active listings. That will be our question over the next few weeks to see if the sales catch back up to the number of active listings. So here we have it all in graph form. So as expected this week, we saw that the active listings rebounded. This was the beginning of the month. A lot of the properties that were canceled at the end of last month would have got relisted, as well as being after the long weekend, the number of active listings tends to jump back up. But we can also see that the number of conditionally sold and sold properties did decrease, and they're not as high as they were. And the wedges of the red and the orange are definitely smaller than they were throughout most of May and June, well, all of May and all of June. Looking in the graph form for new listings and sold listings, we see that there were 390 properties listed this week. This is up 23% from what we saw last week, which was obviously a very big dip, but it's definitely below what we saw in June and obviously May. Of those 390 properties, we had 80% or 313 were new to the market, and 20% or 77 of them were relisted properties. Sales this week were down. That was to be expected because of the long weekend running into this week and also fewer conditional sales last week. Of the homes that sold this week, we had 26% sold without a conditional period. That's the red on this graph. And of the properties that sold this week, only 15% of them were on the market for 7 days or less. 73% were on the market for 30 days or less. Of those homes that sold within 7 days of being listed, 78% of those sold with no conditions. So these percentages, unless you keep track of them every week, they're a little bit skewed from what we saw other weeks. Um, having We had a lot fewer homes selling within 7 days, but I guess that's to be expected with a lot fewer homes being listed last week. But we did have a much higher percent of those selling without conditions. Okay, next we'll zoom into the different areas of the city to look at the more specific stats. In the central urban region, we see that we had an increase in all of the different property type active listings, and we had a fairly significant drop in the number of condominiums that sold, and only a slight increase in the number of detached homes that sold. In Canada and Stittsville, we see that we have an increase in the number of detached in towns that are listed, slight decrease for the condominiums. And for sales, it was up for detached and condominiums just slightly, and then townhomes were just down slightly. In Barrhaven and Riverside South, we see an increase in the number of detached and towns listed for sale. Again, pretty flat for the condominiums. And sales were pretty flat for detached and towns, but down for the condominiums this week. And in Orleans, we see that we have an increase in all property types listed for sale this week. And for sales, they're down for detached and towns and flat for condominiums. Okay, so the next 3 slides are our stats in table form for residential detached, towns, and condos. And please don't leave if you're waiting around for those monthly stats. They're right after these 3 slides. Okay, so here is our monthly snapshot. This would normally be a separate update, but I am linking it here and you'll get a little bit of a audio as you get the stats instead of just having to read it. Okay, so we're looking at the month-end stats for the Ottawa Real Estate Board, and throughout the month of June, there were 1,658 properties that sold. This is an 11% increase from how many properties sold in 2022, in June 2022. In the freehold residential market, sales volume was up by about 10%, and in condo market up by 15.5%. The average sale price in June 2023 was $670,000, which is down 3% from what we saw in June 2022. For freehold properties, they're down a little bit more. It was 3.5% down, but for condos, they were actually up by 2% as compared to June of last year. Okay, so this next slide is the year-to-date stats for 2023. And remember, the year-to-date stats take into account all of the properties that have sold to date in the calendar year. So these numbers are still looking quite negative when you compare them to the 2022 full year stats. So if you look back to last month's update, you'll see that these numbers, although they're still quite negative this month, they are less negative than they were last month. So we're obviously still not at the same point that we were at for sales and obviously prices from 2022, but they are getting closer to the averages from 2022. The question is whether or not the sales volume will remain relatively strong throughout the summer and fall of 2023, bringing up those averages fairly significantly, or will we have a bit of a slump throughout the summer if the Bank of Canada continues to raise the interest rates. The next thing we're going to look at is the trends for the last 12 months. So this is for the residential, this is for both detached and townhomes. And we look at the trends in graph form. We see that the peak of sales in 2023, so far at least, and pretty expectedly, was in May of 2023. And contrary to the last couple of years, May is typically the highest sales volume in the spring. We can see that the average sales price was quite steady. That's the green bars from the last month and actually April as well. And if it holds fairly steady from month to month, if it holds into July, then we'll actually be in positive territory for year-over-year stats when we get to next month's update. And here's the average over the last 5 years, just to give you a bit more of a trend, just since our last couple years have been kind of messed up. And now we're going to look at the condominium for the last 12 months. When we look at them, we can see how much more volatile the condominium market is on a sales when you look at the average sales prices. When you look at June 2022, that's the first bar, to June 2023, the average sale price may have been up by 2%, but we can see that the ups and downs in the months to come. And so we won't know if it's going to be positive or negative over the next few months unless there's an obvious trend in sales prices moving forward. And again, looking at the 5-year trends, we can definitely see that the average sale price is more volatile for condominiums. And we can see that for 2023, our prices are definitely still below what we saw in 2022, but I would say we're pretty solidly above what we saw throughout 2021. Okay, so this was a longer update than normal, but having included the monthly stats from the board. But I hope you find these updates useful. And if you do, please give it a like, give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe to my channel so that you get updated when I release these updates. And I hope you have a fantastic week.